Hi, glad to be back. I hope that I am back online. Yes, if we are back online, I would go to the conclusion of what I was saying. Shall we start? So in one question somebody is put in a rape case, no evidence against the accused, material witness turned hostile, only 2 formal witnesses are remaining. So 232, do we file an application and the court acquits without it? Well, if the court, so at this stage, there is no per se requirement to move an application under 232, but if the court isn't, then you can always move an application under 232. In most of the cases, see what happens is, in a lot of cases where even the court understands that this case is made up, that there was, there's Justice Gambhir's judgment that said that rape is a heinous crime, but in a lot of cases, unfortunately, such allegations are made for purposes like blackmail, for purposes like getting back at someone, to threaten someone, for financial considerations, etc. And the court has to be aware of these issues as well. So what happens is, when you're arguing for charge in such matters, a lot of times the court says, no, we will not discharge, but we'll get in the first, let's get the complainant. If the complainant doesn't support, we will acquit your client. So so at this stage, you can always ask the court that, she has not supported the story, and please acquit. But this would really depend on the facts of the case. I mean, I really don't know the facts of the case, but in normal cases, yes, it is usually done in such a situation. Now, as we were dealing with acquittal, I think I have already met 232. And we don't have a lot of time, so if there are any other questions, you may please send them. Now, yes. So as important is the concept of bail, anticipatory bail. I've already stated what bail and anticipatory bail is. Of compulsory bail, I've already told you what compulsory bail is. Transit bail. Now, transit bail is also a very interesting concept. Suppose an FIR is registered against you in Calcutta, and you're sitting here in Delhi, and you get to know there's an FIR. You can't move an anticipatory bail because you'll have to go to Calcutta to argue the bail or to join investigation. So you go to the court and you say, I am afraid that while I'm going from here to there, Calcutta, I might be arrested. Please protect me. This is called transit bail. In transit bail, the court, you argue, I need a month. The court will say, no, 10 days. You get 10 days. You ask your client to go there, get a lawyer, move to the court, get the protection, etc., etc. That's called transit bail. Now, bail is given in bailable cases. In those cases, it is your right to get bail. This is section 436. Where bail is being sought in non-bailable offences before the MM, in the hierarchy of the offences, where bail can be given by the MM, you move an application under 437. Where the bail is to be given by either the Sessions Court or High Court, it is under section 439. Now, the interesting thing is that though the powers are that you can move before the Session Court or High Court, now customarily the High Court will not entertain a bail unless and until you've gone to the High Court, to the Session Court. How far does precedence play a role in deciding quantum of punishment? Very, very interesting. I'm going to meet this at the end. The cognizance taken by Court of Session, which is not authorized by statute such as Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940. Okay, this also I'll just beat. Let me just finish this. Now, so transit bail, compulsory bail, we have decided what is bail in bailable offences, in non-bailable offences by MM, in non-bailable offences by the Sessions Court or the High Court, and the desert is the anticipatory bail under 438, which is again by the High Court or Session Court. But more important than that, and just to deal with a lot of questions that you have also asked, is the concept of inherent powers of the High Court, which is under section 482. Now 482 gives wide powers to the Honorable High Court to do substantive justice, to see if any illegality is, any wrong is happening, to right that wrong. But it will not get into 482 where there is a protection given in the writ. A lot of times, a lot of lawyers actually move 482 with the writ, which is an incorrect way. A lot of courts do not take too kindly to it. So you need to understand what you're supposed to do. What are the inherent powers of the Honorable Supreme Court, of the High Court? The Honorable Supreme Court in a landmark judgment, this was 1977, number of judgments after that, but all relying on this judgment, which is called the Muniswamy judgment. The Muniswamy judgment is AIR 1977, Supreme Court 1489. And just to explain what the inherent powers of the court are, it said that the inherent jurisdiction may be exercised to give effect to an order under CRPC, to prevent abuse of process of the court, and to secure the ends of justice. Quashing has been done even in cases that cannot be compounded. Quashing has been done in cases which are otherwise could not have, which were long drawn, financial frauds, etc., of huge magnitude, by the parties settled. Quashing has been done in offences that were otherwise could not be compounded, but they were known to each other, the inherently private complaints, etc., between family members. 482 has wide powers. 482 also has wide powers where you can seek a certain kind of investigation where the investigation is not happening the way it should be, where the IO is corrupt, has colluded, where the MM is not, probably passing certain orders that it should, where you want certain, for example, you want that the investigation or the trial takes place within a stipulated period of time. So 482, number of other situations like that. So to quash an FIR, as I've already stated, you can move under 482 when an FIR is filed and you probably are not an accused, you're not even named, you have nothing to do with the FIR, but you're called. So you go and you say that I have nothing to do with it. 482. You seek a quashing of the FIR if it doesn't really make out a case. If it's a case of civil dispute, two parties have financial dispute, one of them goes and gets an FIR. That was one of the questions. Or the other way, where the court that the police is not investigating a matter, and you've gone to the MM, and the MM has the complaint case has been dismissed, and you move. 482 would be where the normal process fails, you move under 482. So the Supreme Court has stated that it can be exercised only when no other remedy is available to litigant and not where a specific remedy is provided by statute, writ jurisdiction. To understand the laws of 482, very interesting. If a person standing as surety for accused dies, what are the consequences? Very somebody who really does a lot of criminal trial has asked this question. So I'll just stop here for a moment. I'll just answer this. See, the law of surety, when you get your bail or anticipatory bail or whatever, there are one or two people who would stand surety for you. Now, though the law says that the surety may not be of the jurisdiction of the court in theory, but practically courts insist that the surety is of their local court. Be as it may, if at any stage the surety wants to withdraw the surety or the surety expires, then you move an application and you change the surety. You bring forth other surety to the satisfaction of the court. Now, it could also be that the surety himself may move an application that I do not want to be a surety for him anymore, and then you move and you bring forth another surety. The court gives you that opportunity to bring another surety. Now, shed some light on 236 and 436A. What is it specifically again that you want? We can note it down and we can meet it at the end if we have time. Let me just put it on my computer so that we can ask this. But yes, so now to come back to Bhajan Lal judgment. which I wanted to read, which is for 482. Why 482 is very important? Because that is the only sword that you have in a number of situations to protect your client. It could be a situation where, for example, it is difficult for your client to get bail, where the police is colluding. You may move. So when you move an application under 482, the court has the right to see any evidence that's there, not just what the prosecution is saying. So 482 could be a great weapon in your hand to bring forth those documents that the IO probably is neglecting or has put under the carpet, etc. So the landmark judgment, there are a number of judgments on 482, but the landmark judgment, one is the PepsiCo judgment that you can read later, but the landmark judgment that I want you to read, and the landmark judgment, because this actually explains the power and the ambit of 482, is this: that the Honorable Supreme Court in Bhajanlal, which is 1992 Supplementary 1, SCC 335, 1992 Supplementary 1, SCC 335, summarized the legal position of 482 to quash criminal proceedings or an FIR, and it stated these points. 1. Where the allegation made in the FIR or complaint, even if they are taken at their face value and accepted in their entirety, do not prima facie constitute an offence or make out a case against the accused. So that is one that I was saying. That where the allegations made in the FIR or the complaint, even if taken at their face value and accepted in their entirety, do not prima facie constitute an offence or make out a case against the accused. 2. Where the allegations in the FIR do not disclose a cognizable offence. So if the police has wrongly registered, you go in 482, you say no case is made out. I don't know why I'm being traumatized. He has to take it to the MM. The MM has to apply his mind and say, yes, you can investigate the matter further or not investigate the matter further. 3rd, where the allegations made in the FIR do not disclose the commission of offence and make out a case against the accused. So you say that whatever is there is nothing against me. Why am I being traumatized? Why am I being harassed by the police? 4. Where the allegations in the FIR constitute only a non-cognizable, do not constitute a cognizable offence, but constitute only a non-cognizable offence, no investigation is permitted by the police without an order of the magistrate. I think, yes, I already said that. The other is where the allegations made in the FIR or complaint are so absurd and inherently improbable, on basis of which no prudent person can ever reach a just conclusion that there is sufficient ground for proceeding against the accused. So this is improbability of the offence. Where there is an express legal bar engraft in any provisions of the court or the concerned act to the institution and continuance of proceedings, and or where there is a specific provision in the court or the concerned act providing efficacious redress of grievance of the aggrieved party. So where there is a special act and the special procedure, I think somebody had asked this question also, where there is a special act or a special procedure put into place, that special act will always prevail upon the general act, and that is the norm. So if there is a process and a procedure given in the special act, it would prevail upon the process and procedure given in the general act. And if the investigating officer, if the prosecution or the trial court still proceeds with the matter in contravention to the special act, you can move an application, you can come to the seek protection of the court under 482. And lastly, where a criminal proceeding is manifestly attended with malafide and or where the proceeding is maliciously instituted with an ulterior motive of wreaking vengeance on the accused and with a view to spite him due to private and personal grudge. So this is where even such allegations are made out which are otherwise not compoundable, but it is clear that they are made out. So in that rape matter, for example, or in certain other allegations where it is so clear that the allegations have been made out only out of spite, of vengeance, to blackmail, to harass, to deal with a civil dispute, etc., you can move under 482. So this is why this actually answers a number of questions that had been put in. There is a question that somebody has asked about 436A, which was subsequently introduced pertaining. This was so. 436A was pertaining to. So those prisoners, those under trial prisoners that are languishing in jail, despite the fact that their maximum punishment, the period of maximum punishment is over. So in such cases, this was more like a public interest thing, where the Supreme Court also stated, and by amendment a number of protections were brought in, that in such cases the under trial prisoners will be able to let go, concept of bail, concept of acquittal. It said that there would be in certain cases there would be a committee that would be constituted, legal aid would be provided, and if in certain cases where a person would be let to go on his own bond, where there is no person to give a surety. Lastly, what is the other question that has been put in? So 482 is a power only of the High Court. Trial court, session court do not have the wide powers under 482. Trial court cannot exercise any power under 482. Sessions court cannot. Only the High Court has this power. It is a very, very special power. It is used in very special circumstances, only when, as I said, there is no other equally efficacious remedy. In cases where investigation itself has not been commenced by the police officer, can the High Court exercise its inherent powers under 482? Against what? I mean, there has to be something on record for the court to apply its powers under 482. And 482 powers very, very rarely would be used at the stage of investigation to mold the investigation. There is a judgment, if you want, I can give you that judgment, that says that the High Court can oversee the investigation in some special cases. It can specially see it when protest petition has been filed, or when the complainant files an application saying that the police is not doing its job and the investigation may be checked by the MM, may be overseen by the MM. In certain cases it can. So 482 very, very rarely at the stage of investigation. Prior investigation 482 of course not, because there is no case before the court. And to mold the investigation, extremely rare cases, usually the court will not get into this. That per se concludes the questions that have been put forth. Somebody had asked this question that I said I'm going to meet at the end, which was how much should we rely on judgment, especially bail or at the time of charge or discharge. Criminal law is more about understanding the facts of the case. Judgments are important, but your instincts when it comes to a criminal case is much more important. Your hard work should be, and you can actually, even if you do not know the law completely, you can still go by. I mean, I'm not saying that you should know the law, but you should know your facts. Your facts should be really, really, really clear. So like me, you can make these notes about every aspect of the law. I usually make it in a diary and I keep my diary with me, and I can just go through it and I can understand what I have done, what the strategy would be, what I'm going to do next. I color code it, use different markers, etc. It's a very colorful diary that I have, but it really helps me to be on top of the game, especially with the kind of matters that we do. And as I said, it's really good to do one big matter because it actually gives you strategies for hundreds of other matters. So if I had to give you an advice, I would say trust your instincts always and sharpen it with precedents. The law should help you. So if it's a minefield, when a case, you know what not to step on because there is a judgment against you. So trust your instincts, rely on precedents to sharpen your case as a backup if the court is not agreeing with you, and also to use the language of the court. you don't want to use your language to the court. The judge is going to understand the language of the court that you can understand by reading those judgments, by relying on those paragraphs, etc. Something that I say in a number of forums is, you should always know your file more than you know the law. And the only thing better than knowing the law, as I have said somewhere else, is knowing the judge. And which means that if you really need to understand your matter, you should be sitting in the court, you should be understanding how the judge operates. What is the thought process of the court? The court could be very aggressive about certain things, could give you a lot of time. You would know whether you're supposed to argue on each and every point, whether you're supposed to bring forth judgments and laws, or whether you should get to the meat of the case. Understanding the court is probably the most important thing that I can teach you, or I can tell you, or I can advise you or guide you when it comes to criminal law. How to prepare your brief is something that somebody had asked me. How to prepare your brief. This was by WhatsApp. So I said that you may falter on law, but you can never falter on facts. If you falter on facts in a criminal case, you're done for. Know your law, but more importantly, always know your facts. In olden days, the criminal lawyers knew everything about the file. They would say that their hands can see, the fingers can see. So you should have that kind of clarity when it comes to understanding the file. How to prepare your brief? As I said that how to prepare a brief, what I like to do is that I like to make my notes in a diary. I now scan those diaries so that they're there with me on my iPad and I can go through it. But keep your diary with you, something like that, and each part can, so different facts can be put in, and keep one diary for a case. It's much easier. So just take that diary, you can see it, and so if you're like me, you like to make your notes in a diary and make it, and also keep your own Bail Act. It's very important. Your Bail Act should be only your Bail Act. Your Bail Act should be filled with scribbles and notes and data and information and defenses and judgments, so that if you're arguing a matter and you open that section, and so you know what else to read, you say that this is referred to such and such, or such and such judgment will be referred. Even if you don't have that judgment at that time, you can tell the court. The judge can take judicial notice of it, and then you can get the photocopy and give it to the court. Lastly, criminal law is not just about law books, not just about judgments, not just about IPC, CRPC, Evidence Act. Criminal law is all about human interaction. Criminal law is all about how you are in court, whether the court trusts you or not, whether you are able to bring forth your story to the court or not. If you are young, I would suggest you to brief senior lawyers. Get the senior lawyers. When you brief senior lawyers, you also are able to understand their strategies. They're able to guide you on how to prepare your brief. In the longer run, it really helps you. If you are older, if you've been for a number of years and you're doing your own matters and you don't think it's important to brief a senior lawyer, then what you can do is that you have a group of friends who can discuss the law amongst each other, discuss strategies amongst each other. After all, we are learning the law. Nobody's proficient in law. We are in the practice of law. And when you share knowledge, only then you become sharper. Only then the knowledge becomes more crystallized. Only then you have the clarity of law, of thought and understanding. That's all. Thanks a lot. I don't think there has been any other questions, but it's been an absolute pleasure. I've taken a lot of your time. I will now take your leave. Thanks a lot, Janvi. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.